In the spring of 1942, 12 German nurses vanished from a military hospital train near the Polish border. No bodies were found. No records explained their fate. For 40 years, their families searched for answers that never came. Then in 1982, a single photograph surfaced in an estate sale in rural Wisconsin. A faded image showing women in nurses' uniforms standing beside an American farmhouse, their faces frozen in expressions that told a story no one was prepared to hear. But how did enemy nurses end up on American soil during the height of the war? And why did someone want their existence erased from history? This story begins with one woman's impossible choice, a decision that would haunt two nations and remain buried for decades. Before we uncover what really happened to these women, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Stories like these connect us across borders and generations. Drop your location in the comments below. We cherish knowing where our dear viewers are from around the world. Greta Hoffmann pressed her palm against the cold window of the hospital train, watching the Polish countryside blur into darkness. At 26, she'd already seen more suffering than most people witnessed in a lifetime. Her white uniform, stained with the day's emergencies, clung to her exhausted frame. "You're thinking about him again," Nurse Ilse whispered beside her, adjusting her Red Cross armband. "I don't know what you mean," Greta lied, but her hand instinctively moved to the letter hidden in her pocket, the one from her brother Klaus, a Wehrmacht officer stationed in North Africa, the one that contained information that could get them both executed. Ilse leaned closer, her voice barely audible over the train's rhythm. "Whatever you're planning, Greta, don't. We're nurses. We save lives. We don't." The train's brakes screamed. Both women lurched forward as the carriage shuddered to a violent stop. Shouts erupted from the front cars, not German shouts. "Was ist das?" Ilse grabbed Greta's arm, her fingers digging in with sudden fear. Through the window, Greta saw them. Shadows moving between the trees, too organized to be partisans, too quiet to be Soviet forces. Her heart hammered as she recognized the uniforms in the moonlight. American. "Alle Krankenschwestern raus! Now!" The command came in broken German, followed by the unmistakable sound of rifles being cocked. Greta's mind raced. Americans this far east? Impossible, unless... "Greta, what's happening?" Ilse's voice cracked with panic, but Greta was already calculating, her brother's letter burning like a brand against her chest. The letter that detailed a secret Wehrmacht operation. The letter that mentioned a list of names, 12 names, all nurses, all on this train. "Listen to me carefully," Greta whispered, gripping Ilse's shoulders. "When we get outside, stay close to me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And whatever happens next..." The carriage door exploded inward. A tall American officer stepped through, his eyes scanning the dozen terrified nurses with an expression that wasn't quite hostility. It was something worse, recognition. "Greta Hoffmann?" he said in perfect German, looking directly at her. Her blood turned to ice. How did he know her name? "You and your colleagues are coming with us. You have 30 seconds to gather your medical bags. Anyone who resists will be left behind." He paused, his next words deliberate and chilling. "And I promise you, you don't want to be left behind for what's coming." Ilse's fingernails dug into Greta's arm. "What does he mean, what's coming?" But Greta was staring past the officer, through the shattered door at the eastern horizon. There, barely visible against the night sky, she saw it. The faint orange glow of fires. Many fires. Moving closer. The officer followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "The SS is 20 minutes behind us. They're not here to rescue you, Fräulein Hoffmann. They're here to make sure you never talk about what you know." Greta's hand moved to her pocket, to Klaus's letter, to the terrible secret it contained. A secret that 12 nurses had accidentally discovered. A secret that made them more dangerous than any soldier. "How do I know you won't kill us?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The American officer's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because, Nurse Hoffmann, we need you alive, All of you, and we need you to trust me for the next 5 minutes, or none of us will survive the night." Behind him, Greta heard her fellow nurses gathering their bags, whispering prayers, preparing for whatever came next. She had 5 seconds to make a choice that would determine all their fates. Trust the enemy who knew her name, or wait for the SS who wanted her silenced forever. "Alle mitkommen," Greta commanded. Her decision made. "We go with them." As they filed out into the night, Ilse grabbed her arm one final time. "Greta, what did you do?" But there was no time to answer. The American soldiers were already herding them toward trucks hidden in the forest, moving with urgent precision. And in the distance, the sound of German vehicles grew louder, accompanied by something that made Greta's stomach turn. Dogs barking. The officer pushed her toward the lead truck. "Move faster, they brought trackers." "Where are you taking us?" Greta demanded. He met her eyes, and in that moment she saw something unexpected. Fear. "Somewhere you'll never be found," he said. "Somewhere that doesn't exist on any map. Somewhere you'll have to become someone else entirely." The truck engine roared to life. As they pulled away from the train, Greta looked back one final time and saw the SS vehicles emerging from the tree line, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting prey. Beside her, Ilse was crying silently. 3 other nurses clutched their medical bags like lifelines. And Greta realized with crushing certainty that the woman she'd been, Greta Hoffmann, daughter of Munich, sister to Klaus, nurse of the Wehrmacht, had just died on that abandoned train. Whatever came next, whoever she had to become, there would be no going back. The photograph that would surface 40 years later would capture this moment. 12 women in German nurses' uniforms standing in front of an American farmhouse, their faces showing not relief, but the haunted awareness of people who'd crossed a line from which there was no return. But first, they had to survive the journey to that farmhouse. And the officer's next words made it clear that survival was far from guaranteed. "There's something you need to understand," he said as the truck bounced along the forest road, SS vehicles now in pursuit behind them. "The reason they want you dead isn't just about what you know, it's about what you are." Greta's blood chilled. "What we are?" He looked at each of the 12 nurses, his expression grave. "Witnesses to something that will change how the world sees this war, and there are people on both sides who will do anything to keep that truth buried." The truck swerved violently as gunfire erupted behind them. No, the safe house was a crumbling monastery outside Krakow, its stone walls thick enough to muffle the sounds of the firefight that had followed them through the forest. Greta crouched behind her overturned pew, her medical bag clutched to her chest, listening to bullets chip away at the ancient masonry outside. "How long can they hold them off?" Nurse Margaret whispered, her young face pale in the candlelight. "Long enough," Greta lied, though she had no idea if it was true. The American officer, he'd finally introduced himself as Captain James Morrison, was barking orders to his men in English. Greta's limited understanding of the language caught fragments. Extraction point, 20 minutes, no survivors. That last phrase made her stomach clench. No survivors. Did he mean the SS or did he mean them? Ilse crawled over, her uniform torn from their desperate run through the woods. "Greta, I need to know what's happening. Why are they hunting us specifically? We're just nurses. We treated soldiers. We didn't—" "We saw the children," Greta interrupted quietly. The words hung in the air like a curse. Around them, the other nurses fell silent, their faces reflecting the same horror that had been haunting Greta since that terrible day 3 weeks ago. They'd been reassigned temporarily to a facility near Chomno. It was supposed to be a routine posting, treating soldiers recovering from the Eastern Front. But Greta had gotten lost looking for supplies, had wandered into a section of the compound that was supposed to be off-limits. She'd seen the trucks, the children being unloaded, the building with the thick walls and the strange vents. And she'd seen the nurses, German nurses like herself, administering what they were told were vaccinations. But Greta had been a nurse long enough to recognize the smell of death. We all saw, Nurse Anna said from the shadows, her voice hollow. They made us sign papers, said it was classified medical research, said we'd be executed for treason if we spoke about it. And then they decided papers weren't enough, Greta finished bitterly. They decided we were loose ends. Captain Morrison appeared suddenly, crouching beside them. His face was streaked with dirt and powder burns. We have a problem. The extraction plane can only take 8 passengers. There are 12 of you. The nurses stared at him in horror. You're saying 4 of us have to stay behind? Ilsa's voice rose dangerously. To be captured by the SS? I'm saying 4 of you have to take the secondary route, overland, through Czechoslovakia to Switzerland. It's more dangerous, but it's a death sentence, Greta interrupted. The SS will hunt anyone left behind. You know that. Morrison's jaw tightened. I don't make the rules, Fräulein Hoffmann. I just follow orders. And my orders are to extract the witnesses who have the most valuable intelligence. Most valuable. Nurse Sophia stood up, her voice shaking with rage. We all saw the same thing. We're all witnesses to. Not all of you documented what you saw. Morrison cut her off, his eyes fixed on Greta. But you did, didn't you? You kept records. That's why your name was at the top of the SS kill list. Every eye turned to Greta. She felt the weight of their stares, the accusation and fear mixed together. I kept a medical log, she admitted quietly. Names, dates, numbers. I thought someone needed to remember. I thought if the war ended, if Germany lost, someone would need proof of what happened there. You documented a war crime, Morrison said bluntly, and now that documentation makes you the most important person in this room. You're getting on that plane. The question is, which 3 others come with you? The monastery shook as an explosion detonated somewhere close. Dust rained from the ceiling. Outside, the gunfire intensified. I won't choose, Greta said firmly. Either we all survive, or none of us do. Morrison grabbed her arm, his grip iron-hard. You don't understand. The intelligence you carry could save thousands of lives, could help end this war faster, could bring the people responsible for what you saw to justice. Your personal guilt doesn't matter compared to... It's not guilt. Greta wrenched her arm free. It's loyalty. These women trusted me, followed me. I won't abandon them to save myself. Even if it means that evidence dies with you? Morrison's eyes bored into hers. Even if it means those children's deaths mean nothing? The question hit Greta like a physical blow. Around her, the other nurses watched, waiting for her answer, waiting to see if she would sacrifice them for a greater good. Ilsa touched her shoulder gently. Greta, if you have proof, if you can make sure the world knows what happened there, maybe that's more important than... No. Greta's voice was steel. I won't play God with your lives. Morrison stood abruptly, frustration radiating from him. Then you're a fool, and you'll get everyone killed for nothing. He stalked away, shouting orders in English. The other soldiers began preparing for evacuation, their movements urgent. Nurse Anna crawled closer to Greta. Where is it? The documentation? Greta's hand moved instinctively to her medical bag, to the false bottom she'd sewn in 3 weeks ago. Inside were 40 pages of careful notes, written in medical shorthand, detailing everything she'd seen at Chomno. Names of officers, descriptions of procedures, estimates of numbers, evidence that could hang dozens of people, evidence that made her more dangerous than any weapon. It's safe, Greta said quietly. Then maybe Morrison is right, Anna said, her voice barely audible. Maybe you should go. Take 3 others. The rest of us can try the overland route. At least then some of us might survive. And if you're captured, if the SS tortures you for information about where I went? Anna's smile was sad and knowing. Then we'll die before we talk. We're German, Greta. We know how to be stubborn. Before Greta could respond, Morrison was back, his expression urgent. Decision time. The plane leaves in 15 minutes. I need 4 names now, or I'm choosing for you. Greta looked around at the 11 faces watching her. Ilsa, who'd been her closest friend since training. Margaret, barely 20, who still believed in the goodness of people. Anna, who'd held dying soldiers and whispered prayers over them. Sophia, who sang to patients to ease their pain. How could she choose who lived and who died? "There's another option," a voice said from the shadows. Everyone turned. Nurse Elizabeth stepped forward, the oldest of them at 34, her face lined with exhaustion and something else. Determination. "We split the documentation," Elizabeth said calmly. "Greta keeps the original. 3 others carry copies. We all go different routes. That way, even if some of us are captured, the evidence survives." Morrison shook his head. "There's no time to make copies, and splitting up makes everyone more vulnerable." "Then we memorize it," Elizabeth countered. "Greta, how many pages?" 40. "But the details are, we're nurses. We memorize medication dosages, surgical procedures, patient histories. We can memorize 40 pages of notes." Elizabeth looked around at the others. "If we each take responsibility for remembering specific sections, we become 12 copies of the evidence. They'd have to kill all of us to bury the truth." A long silence fell. Outside, the gunfire had stopped, which somehow felt more ominous than the battle. Morrison's radio crackled. A voice spoke urgently in English. His face went pale. "The SS is pulling back," he translated. "They're not retreating. They're surrounding the monastery. They're going to wait us out or burn us out." He looked at Greta. "We have maybe 10 minutes before this place becomes a death trap. So I need your answer now. Who gets on the plane?" Greta stood, her decision crystallizing. "All of us, or none of us." "That's not an option." "Then make it an option, Captain. You said you need this evidence. You said it could change the war." "Well, the evidence isn't just on paper. It's in our heads, our memories, our testimonies. You want the full story? You need all 12 of us alive." Morrison stared at her, conflict warring across his face. Then he grabbed his radio and spoke rapidly in English, his tone urgent and demanding. The response came back in crackling bursts. Morrison listened, his expression unreadable. Finally, he lowered the radio and looked at Greta with something like respect. "You just convinced my commanding officer to risk an entire operation for 12 enemy nurses. I hope you understand what that means." "What does it mean?" Ilsa asked. Morrison's smile was grim. "It means if we survive the next hour, you're all going to America. It means you'll be given new identities, new lives, new histories. It means Greta Hoffman and her colleagues will cease to exist. And it means you'll spend the rest of this war in protective custody, waiting to testify at trials that may never happen. And if we're captured before we reach the plane," Margaret's voice trembled, "then the SS will make sure you disappear so completely that no one will ever know you existed." Morrison checked his weapon. "So I suggest we don't get captured." He moved to the monastery door, his men taking positions around him. "The plane is landing in a field 2 kilometers north. We have to cross open ground with SS units on all sides. Stay low, stay quiet, and if someone falls, you keep moving." "Understood." 12 nurses nodded, their faces set with determination born of desperation. Greta grabbed her medical bag, feeling the weight of the documentation hidden inside. 40 pages that could bring monsters to justice. 40 pages that had already condemned 12 women to become ghosts. As Morrison prepared to open the door, Ilsa gripped Greta's hand. "If we don't make it, we'll make it," Greta said firmly. "We survived Chelmno. We'll survive this." But as the door swung open and they plunged into the night, Greta couldn't shake the feeling that survival would come at a price none of them had anticipated. That the women running through the Polish darkness toward an American plane were already dead in every way that mattered, and that the photograph taken 40 years later would show not survivors, but ghosts who'd been living on borrowed time since the moment they chose to remember instead of forget. Morrison's voice cut through the darkness. "Move! Now!" They ran. The field was smaller than Greta had imagined, barely large enough for the twin-engine plane that sat waiting, its propellers already spinning, its lights extinguished to avoid detection. Around them, the night pressed in with suffocating darkness, broken only by distant searchlights sweeping the horizon. "Faster," Morrison urged, half-dragging Nurse Margaret, who twisted her ankle in a rabbit hole 50 meters back. Greta's lungs burned. Her medical bag slammed against her hip with each stride, a constant reminder of the burden she carried. Behind them, shouts erupted in German. The SS had found their trail. "They're coming!" Sophia gasped, her voice edged with panic. 10 more seconds!" Morrison shouted back. "Just 10 more!" The first gunshot cracked across the field. Greta heard the bullet whine past her head, impossibly close. Instinct made her duck, but training made her keep running. The plane's door was open, an American soldier reaching out from inside. "Come on, move it!" Ilsa reached the plane first, practically thrown inside by one of Morrison's men. Then Anna, then Elizabeth. One by one, the nurses scrambled aboard, their white uniforms ghostly in the darkness. Greta was 3 meters away when she heard the scream behind her. She spun around. Nurse Sophia had fallen, clutching her leg, dark blood spreading across her uniform. 2 SS soldiers were sprinting toward her across the field, their rifles raised. "Leave her!" Morrison grabbed Greta's arm. "We can't!" But Greta was already running back, her medical training overriding every survival instinct. She reached Sophia just as the SS soldiers closed to within 20 meters. "Can you stand?" Greta demanded, assessing the wound with practiced efficiency. "Through the calf, painful but not fatal if treated quickly." "I can't. It hurts." "You can." Greta hauled Sophia to her feet, supporting her weight. "You will." The SS soldiers were shouting now, ordering them to stop, to surrender. Greta ignored them, focusing only on the plane, on Morrison's horrified face in the doorway, on the impossible distance between survival and capture. 15 meters. 10. "Halt, oder wir schießen!" The SS officer's voice was cold, certain. Greta didn't halt. She dragged Sophia forward, her muscles screaming, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. 5 meters. Morrison leaned out of the plane, his pistol raised, providing covering fire. The SS soldiers dove for cover, giving Greta precious seconds. 2 meters. Hands grabbed them, American hands, strong and urgent, pulling them into the plane. Greta and Sophia tumbled onto the metal floor as the door slammed shut and the engines roared to full power. The plane lurched forward, accelerating across the rough field. Through the small window, Greta saw the SS soldiers running alongside, firing, their bullets pinging off the fuselage. "Hold on!" the pilot shouted. The plane lifted, nose rising sharply. For one terrible moment, Greta thought they wouldn't make it, that they'd stall and crash back to Earth. Then they were airborne, climbing steeply, leaving the field and the SS and Poland behind. Inside the cramped cargo hold, 12 nurses sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the same disbelief. They'd survived. Greta immediately turned to Sophia, examining her leg wound by the dim interior light. "I need my medical bag, and water, and clean cloth." Morrison handed her supplies without a word, watching as she worked with efficient precision, cleaning the wound, applying pressure, wrapping it tightly. "You went back for her," he said quietly, "after I told you to leave her." "She's my responsibility," Greta replied, not looking up from her work. "They all are. That kind of loyalty will get you killed. That kind of loyalty is the only thing keeping us human." Greta tied off the bandage and finally met his eyes. "You wouldn't understand." Morrison's expression was unreadable. "You're wrong. I understand perfectly. That's why I'm risking my career and my men to save 12 enemy nurses who should be prisoners of war." "Then why are you doing it?" Ilsa asked from across the hold. "Why risk everything for us?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, the plane's engines filling the silence. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Because 6 months ago I was part of a unit that liberated a village in France. We found a mass grave, civilians, women and children, executed by SS units for hiding resistance fighters. He paused, his jaw tight. We documented everything, took photographs, collected evidence, sent it up the chain of command. And you know what happened? No one answered. Nothing. The reports were classified, the photographs were buried. The officers responsible were never identified, never charged, never punished. Because the war was still going on, and justice was less important than operational security. Morrison looked directly at Greta. So, when I was told there were 12 German nurses who'd witnessed something similar, who documented it, who were about to be silenced by their own side, I volunteered for this mission, because maybe, just maybe, this time the evidence won't be buried. This time, someone will be held accountable. The weight of his words settled over the group. Greta felt the documentation in her bag like a physical presence, a responsibility that suddenly felt even heavier. "Where are you taking us?" Elizabeth asked. "You said America, but where exactly?" "A place called Camp Concordia, Kansas. Middle of nowhere. It's a POW camp, but you won't be prisoners. You'll be protected witnesses. You'll be given new identities, taught English, prepared to testify when the time comes." "And if the time never comes?" Anna's voice was hollow. "If the war ends, and no one wants to hear what we saw?" Morrison's silence was answer enough. Nurse Margaret started crying quietly. Others joined her. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were alive, but they'd lost everything. Their country, their identities, their futures. Greta moved through the hold, checking on each woman, offering what comfort she could. When she reached Ilse, her friend grabbed her hand tightly. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Ilse whispered. "Running? Becoming traitors?" "We're not traitors," Greta said firmly. "We're witnesses. There's a difference." "Is there?" "We're German nurses flying to America in an enemy plane, carrying evidence against our own military. How is that not treason?" Greta thought about the children at Chomno, the trucks, the building with the thick walls, the smell of death that had clung to her uniform for days afterward. "Because some things are more important than nationality," she said quietly. "Some things are more important than loyalty to a flag. We saw something that the world needs to know about, something that can't be allowed to continue, can't be allowed to be forgotten. If that makes us traitors, then I'll wear that label proudly." Ilse nodded slowly, but her eyes remained troubled. The plane flew on through the night, carrying 12 women away from everything they'd known toward an uncertain future in a foreign land. Below them, Europe burned with the fires of war. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns that would soon become unfamiliar as they crossed the Atlantic. Morrison approached Greta again, his expression serious. "There's something you need to know. Something I wasn't authorized to tell you until we were airborne." Greta's stomach tightened. "What?" "The SS didn't just want you dead because of what you saw at Chomno. They wanted you dead because of who you are." He pulled a folder from his pack, opened it to reveal a photograph. Greta's blood turned to ice. It was her brother Klaus in his Wehrmacht officer's uniform. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was an SS officer she recognized from Chomno, one of the men who'd overseen the operations there. "Your brother was part of the security detail at that facility," Morrison said quietly. "He's the one who reported that you'd been in the restricted area. He's the one who put your name on the kill list." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Klaus was her brother. He'd sent her letters. Greta's hand moved to her pocket, to the letter she'd been carrying, the letter that had warned her about the list of 12 nurses, the letter that had seemed like a desperate attempt to save her. But what if it hadn't been a warning? What if it had been something else entirely? "He knew they were coming for us," Greta whispered, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "He knew, and he told me just enough to make sure I'd run, to make sure I'd look guilty." "He covered his tracks," Morrison confirmed, "made it look like you'd stolen classified information and fled, made himself look like a loyal officer who'd reported a security breach. And now, If you ever try to testify about what you saw, he can claim you're a traitor with an agenda, that your testimony is revenge for being exposed. Greta felt the world tilting beneath her. Her own brother had betrayed her, had condemned her and 11 other innocent women to death or exile to protect his own involvement in atrocities. "I'm sorry," Morrison said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I know this is—" "Don't!" Greta's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Don't apologize. Just tell me one thing. When this war ends, when we testify, will he be held accountable?" Morrison's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "We'll try," he said finally. "But officers like your brother are good at covering their tracks, good at finding scapegoats, good at surviving." Greta looked down at the letter in her hand, the letter she'd treasured as proof that her brother still cared, still wanted to protect her. Now it felt like poison. She walked to the small window and looked out at the darkness below. Somewhere down there, Klaus was probably sleeping peacefully, secure in the knowledge that he'd eliminated a threat and protected his career. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated his sister's determination to see justice done. "Captain Morrison," Greta said, her voice cold and clear, "I want to make you a promise. I will testify. I will tell the world everything I saw at Chomno. And I will make sure my brother's name is included in that testimony, no matter what it costs me." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's a dangerous promise, Fräulein Hoffmann." "Good," Greta replied, "because I'm done being safe, I'm done being silent, and I'm done protecting people who don't deserve protection." She turned back to face the other nurses, who'd been listening in stunned silence. "We all need to make that same promise," Greta said. "Right now, we promise that no matter how long it takes, no matter what they do to us, no matter how much they try to bury the truth, we will remember, we will testify. We will make sure those children's deaths meant something." One by one, the 11 other nurses nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. They were no longer just survivors. They were witnesses with a mission, and that mission would define the rest of their lives. As the plane carried them toward America, toward new identities and uncertain futures, Greta made one more silent promise. The photograph that would be taken when they arrived, the photograph that would surface 40 years later, would not show victims or traitors. It would show 12 women who'd chosen truth over safety, justice over loyalty, and humanity over nationalism. Even if the world wasn't ready to hear their story yet, even if it took 40 years for anyone to listen, they would wait. They would remember. And when the time came, they would speak. The farmhouse in Kansas looked nothing like Germany. Greta stood on the porch 3 weeks after their arrival, staring at endless fields of wheat that stretched to a horizon too wide, too open, too American. Behind her, the other nurses were learning English from a patient tutor, stumbling over unfamiliar words that felt like stones in their mouths. "Greta, come inside," Ilse called. "They're taking the photograph today." The photograph. The one that would document their arrival, their new identities, their transformation from German nurses to protected witnesses. The one that would be filed away in some classified archive and forgotten, or so they thought. Greta walked inside, where Captain Morrison waited with a camera. The 12 nurses assembled in front of the farmhouse, still wearing their German uniforms because their American clothes hadn't arrived yet. A strange limbo, neither German nor American, neither prisoners nor free. "Smile," Morrison said, but none of them did. The camera clicked. 12 faces frozen in time, their expressions showing not relief, but the haunted awareness of women who'd crossed a line from which there was no return. "That's it," Morrison said, lowering the camera. "Your old lives are officially over." But he was wrong. Their old lives weren't over. They were just beginning to haunt them in ways none of them could have predicted. 2 years passed. The war ended. The trials began at Nuremberg. Greta and the other nurses waited for the call to testify, practicing their English, rehearsing their statements, keeping their memories sharp. The call never came. "They don't want us," Elizabeth said one evening, her voice hollow. They have enough evidence from the camps that were liberated. They don't need testimony from nurses who fled before the war ended. They think we're unreliable, Anna added bitterly. Traitors who can't be trusted. Greta sat at the kitchen table, her 40 pages of documentation spread before her, the evidence she'd risked everything to preserve, evidence that was gathering dust while the men responsible walked free or received minimal sentences. My brother testified at Nuremberg, she said quietly. I read about it in the newspaper. He claimed he was just following orders. He claimed he tried to stop what was happening at Chomno. He was acquitted. The room fell silent. The injustice of it burned like acid. So we gave up everything for nothing, Margaret whispered. We became ghosts for nothing. No, Greta stood abruptly, gathering her papers. We became witnesses, and witnesses don't stop witnessing just because no one wants to listen. We write it down, we preserve it, we make sure that someday when people are ready to hear the truth is waiting for them. Someday, Ilse's laugh was bitter. We'll be dead by then. Maybe, Greta agreed, but the truth won't be. And 40 years later, in 1982, a woman named Sarah Morrison, Captain James Morrison's daughter, was sorting through her late father's estate when she found a box marked Concordia Project, classified. Inside was a photograph. 12 women in German nurses' uniforms standing in front of a Kansas farmhouse, their faces showing something Sarah couldn't quite name. And beneath the photograph was a letter in her father's handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone. These women were the bravest people I ever met. They saw evil and refused to look away. They documented atrocities when it would have been safer to forget. They gave up everything to be witnesses, and then the world refused to listen. I promised them their testimony would matter. I failed that promise, but maybe you won't. The documentation is in this box, their statements, their evidence, everything they preserved for 40 years, waiting for someone to care. Don't let them wait any longer. Sarah Morrison stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called a journalist friend who specialized in World War II history. I have a story for you, she said. About 12 women who disappeared in 1942, about a truth that's been buried for 40 years, about witnesses who never stopped witnessing, even when no one was listening. The journalist arrived the next day. The story broke 3 weeks later. The photograph appeared on the front page of newspapers across America and Europe. And in a small apartment in Wisconsin, an 86-year-old woman named Greta Hoffman, though she'd been living as Grace Hoffman for 4 decades, saw her own face staring back at her from the morning paper. She picked up the phone with shaking hands and dialed a number she'd memorized 40 years ago, the number for the other survivors. Did you see? She asked when Ilse answered. I saw, Ilse replied, her voice thick with emotion. After all this time, someone finally listened. Not someone, Greta corrected, looking at the photograph, at the faces of 12 young women who'd refused to forget. Everyone. The whole world is listening now. Within a month, all 12 surviving nurses, now elderly women scattered across America, were reunited for the first time since 1945. They testified before a special historical commission. Their documentation was entered into official records. The truth about Chomno, corroborated by their meticulous notes, became part of the permanent historical record. And Greta's brother Klaus, living quietly in Argentina under an assumed name, was finally identified and extradited to face trial for war crimes. Justice had taken 40 years, but it had come. As Greta stood before the commission, reading from the notes she'd preserved for 4 decades, she thought about that night in Poland, the train, the SS soldiers, the impossible choice between safety and truth. She'd chosen truth. They all had. And in the end, truth had proven more powerful than silence, more enduring than fear, and more important than the 40 years it had taken for the world to finally listen. The photograph that had been buried in a classified file for 4 decades became one of the most iconic images of World War II testimony, not because it showed liberation or victory, but because it showed something rarer. The faces of people who'd chosen to remember when forgetting would have been easier. 12 women who disappeared in 1942 and reappeared in 1982, carrying a truth that refused to die.